Okay, good morning everyone. Hello. So welcome to the workshop stage, to this panel, different markets, different challenges, how to scale your fintech company across Europe and the rest of the world, of course. My name is Carl-Philipp Wackernagel. I will be your host today, and I have great panelists with me today. And I would like to introduce those panelists to you now. So we will start with Clément on the other side. So Clément, you're the Chief Operating Officer of SumUp. And actually, you just launched in 16 new markets this year alone. And SumUp is now in 31 countries all over the world. Wow, impressive. Please, can you say some words about what is SumUp, what do you do, and how did this come that you launched 16 countries in just 1 year?
Do you hear me? Yeah. So basically, SumUp is a leader on MPOS field, so mobile point of sale. So basically, we developed small readers to accept credit card payment. So we equip small merchants to accept credit card payment, and we try to provide a striking payment experience. So it's even easier and faster than cash. So we were live in 15 countries, mostly in Europe and in Brazil at the beginning of the year. And we entered into 16 new countries this year, in the USA, in Chile, and in many more countries in Europe for various reasons. But I guess we are going to discuss that in later.
Okay, well, awesome. Thank you very much. We're going to continue with Carolin. So, Carolin, you're the Managing Director of FinLeap. And I just read and I just saw that you moved across from our office, actually, in H32, the Berlin Central Fintech Hub. Can you talk about that a bit?
So to explain FinLeap a little bit more in depth, FinLeap is a fintech company builder. It started 3 years ago out of Berlin. We have built 13 different business models all around fintech, insurtech, and asset management. And we just recently got elected from the German government as the official fintech hub in Berlin. And we moved into a former Deutsche Bank building and have now 11,000 square meters just for us and other fintechs in Berlin. By that, we are the biggest, not only the biggest fintech company builder in Europe, but as well the biggest fintech hub size-wise.
Great. Continuing with Jens. Jens, you're the CEO of Spotcap. And you just received an investment of 22 million euro. That's an impressive number. So what are you going to do with all that money? What is Spotcap?
Yeah. So, yeah, welcome. Thanks for the introduction. So, yeah, what are we doing with the money and what are we doing in general? Spotcap is a own balance sheet lender providing funds to SMEs, working capital funds across 5 countries. We are operating since 2014. And yeah, that injection was both debt and equity together with the previous funds totaling around 100 million since we launched, which is quite a good number for 3 years in operations. We use that to grow our existing markets primarily and are also entering certain partnerships with banks where we continue doing platform investments. And for this, we obviously also need some funds, so well equipped and looking forward to the next year.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. And next up, and last in our round, we have Katharina. Katharina, you're the head of Europe at Raisin. And you just recently, you're also, of course, based in Berlin, which we all have a strong tie to Berlin, which I'll explain later. But you recently bought a UK fintech company. Can you explain that, please?
Hi.
And so what does Raisin do?
What does Raisin do?
Yeah.
Exactly. To maybe briefly explain what does Raisin do. Raisin is effectively a savings marketplace. So it basically allows you with one single sign up to access by now almost 40 banks from 17 different European countries. So far it has been live in 31 countries, but it's largely a Euro business and a Euro platform. So indeed, part of the reason why did we buy a UK company was we're planning on launching this now for the GBP market, which is different, very specific. We have the Brexit context as well, which is why ultimately we ended up saying it might make sense to different to what we do with all our other markets where we steer it from Berlin. For the UK, it's a rather specific case and a local presence might make a lot of sense.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. So I heard a lot of impressive number in terms of which markets you're active in. 31 markets, 5 markets, a lot of, and FinLeap, I don't know how many markets is there?
Over 10 in Europe. Over 10 markets in
Europe.
Europe.
Over 10 markets in Europe. Okay. I would like to ask Jens, you know, going into new markets and looking at new markets, how do you actually choose, you know? In the European Union, there are several mid-sized markets, but in the world, there are several really huge markets, emerging markets. How do you choose a good market that fits your product?
Now, there are probably 4 to 5 crucial factors for us. So one is obviously the absolute size of the market, whether it's the number of SMEs or the net lending volume. On the other side, given that we are not a peer-to-peer player, we also look at regulation, quite crucially actually for us, to basically operate as a lender to SMEs without taking deposits, which in certain countries, also such as the UK, is quite straightforward with a respective credit license. In Germany, it's basically, I would say, completely restricted in a way that you almost need to have a full bank license to do so. Being somewhat... SMEs being somewhat...
Can I ask, is that the reason why you're not active in Germany, actually?
I would say one of the top 2 reasons, especially. I'm not saying that therefore we're never going to go to Germany, but potentially in a slightly different setup, let's put it this way. But yeah, I mean, the fact that there is no sandbox environment to basically also prove our business model and our credit assessment and models is definitely something which I think blocks quite a lot of players in our sector, at least, to operate in Germany.
And you have used the sandbox model in other markets?
Exactly, it did exist, or it's already beyond sandbox environment, and that seemed to work quite well. And it's always about, you know, the right protection of the stakeholder, right? You don't want to, especially when you take deposits, obviously there are reasons why you need to be regulated, but in our case we have institutional funds, so if we prove there can be a good business case, I think it makes sense to open up, especially as it helps the SMEs, which are heavily underserved in many countries. In Germany, maybe a bit less, given the saving banks being quite heavily present. But in many markets where we operate, you have a high concentration of the top 3 to 5 banks, which normally do not lend between 20 and 100, 150,000. And that's where most of the SMEs are sitting, where they have the working capital needs, and that's why it's a good business model, and that's why overall this is also an important factor next to the other 2. And to a certain extent, the access to data and the way you can basically build a service platform in each country without completely changing your business model is also crucial, because when you scale, you don't want to come up with a different approach in every country you go to. Obviously, there is customization in various ways, but if you fundamentally need to change the way you have an application and you have a risk assessment and you have an operational model in the back end, then this wouldn't be most likely to scale to a new market. And that's why going to another market requires a lot of research up front, including the regulatory environment, the compliance side, quite important. But then you can basically execute, and that's why we're only present in 5 countries at the moment, maybe not 10 or 12. Yeah.
Clément, is that true for you too, that the research part is very important, or do you have like an overall strategy that you're thinking, okay, top-tier markets, second-tier markets? What's your strategy in terms of new markets?
So first, we want to be the first ever global card acceptance brand. So basically, we want to expand globally. So that's why we have done these 16 countries this year, is we wanted to give a strong message to the company, but also to the world, that we want to expand globally. Then the reason we entered into the 16 countries have been very different. We started with the USA. So first, if you want to be live in one country, you need to do 3 things right. The first thing is to manage a regulatory setup to get a license. The second reason is you need to have the technical integrations with the banking system, and it might be different in every country. And it's very time-consuming, and it takes a lot of resource from IT to do it. And the third reason is you need to localize your product. It could be the language, the fees, the currencies, the time zone. We have to ship the readers locally, so in terms of logistics, it creates a lot of impact in terms of VAT, import, customs, and so on. So to manage those 3 things right, obviously, it creates a lot of work. So you need to pick carefully the country. So USA is a no-brainer for us, because 30% of the volume of card is done globally from the USA. So if we want to be a relevant player, we need to be relevant in the USA. So it was a huge investment for us. but it's a really a strategic movement. So it's for the USA. Then for Chile, it was not a strategic movement. Even if we consider Latin America as strategic, it was an opportunistic move, because we have been approached by the local bank, Banco Estado, which is almost a monopoly in Chile. They did a study with BCG, and BCG recommended them to use SumUp as a partner to implement MPOS in Chile. So because they approached us and they had good investment and good arguments, we decided to follow and to enter into Chile. So we could be open to opportunistic movement. The rest of the countries, it was in Europe. And why we decided to go live in those countries is because we had the license and we could passport the license in those countries, so it was easier for us. And then the second reason is because the technical integration was already done. So the third part was we need to localize the product. So obviously we went live in Finland. We need to manage Finnish. We went live in Norway. We need to manage local currency there. In Baltic, all the Baltic countries, in Hungary, in Czech Republic, and so on. So it was the first two parts were already done thanks to the fact that we were already live in Europe in the past, and our integrations allowed us to do it. But then the localization is still a huge amount of work. So it was a way for us to build up capabilities to enter into even more countries. So manage more languages, manage more currencies, being open soon 24 hours. So it's all for these reasons that we have entered into those countries.
Okay. Let me ask. There's different strategies on how to enter new markets. So you can basically just do M&A and buy some player who is already on the market, or you can open up a branch office, hire country managers. Katharina, you just opened up a new office. What is your view on this? What's your preferred way on tackling a new market? Do you like to organically grow a team there, or is that not fast enough, or what's your take on this?
So indeed, again, UK was a very, very specific case. So we're also already live. So we're available in 31 European countries, but we have what we call a localized presence. So not English speaking, but local language, local tax process, etc. Germany, Austria, France, Spain, and now the UK. Other than the UK, we've basically done it organically and remotely. So we do have country managers, obviously, yes, regulate. So of the top 3 things to look at, regulation, I think in any fintech will make that list. So that needs to be figured out first. We need to do a certain extent of localization. However, in our case, the lucky thing is that a savings product is an extremely simple financial product. So it doesn't get quite as complicated as for working capital or things like that. But for us, because we're a pure online player, it's actually something that we do from one location at the moment. So yes, we have a local team, so to speak, a Spanish team or a French team, but they actually physically sit in Berlin, because a lot of the setup is indeed on the tech side, setting up the website, and then yes, there is a part of finding partnerships, finding marketing channels, etc. But there it's quite a mix between, yes, needing to be on the ground, establishing those partnerships, and on the other hand, taking advantage of some of the synergies that just exist, because ultimately affiliate marketing or Google AdWords, quite frankly, don't require you to sit in Madrid to manage a Spanish Google AdWords account. So largely speaking, we actually do this without staff on the ground. UK, again, is a very specific situation with an uncertain legal situation and legal status where it's not quite clear if you can do it without a physical presence. Plus, it's a different currency, which in the case of savings products, obviously also is quite important.
And how important is speed for you? Because, you know, there's a difference. There's always a time difference. And if you have people on the ground, or if you do it remotely, or, I mean, the fastest probably if you do an M&A and just have a player there who has already some customers. But how important would be speed for you? And the others, please chime in if you have a different or opposing opinion on this.
So speed is extremely important for us, but I would say speed doesn't depend on being physically in let's take Spain as an example, or Berlin, but speed is largely driven by regulatory processes, which then is unfortunately tends to be opposite of speed. So I think this is something that where indeed, if you have a passportable license, that's great. Savings intermediation, unfortunately, does not have a passportable license. So it's something we need to look at on a country-by-country basis. Okay. So yes, we love going as fast as we possibly can, but whenever there's a license involved, speed is largely driven by external factors, aka the speed at which a regulator is willing to move, which usually is only influenceable to a certain extent, and a certain extent is just dependent on what they do and how fast they do it.
Carol, I guess the fastest sector out there with the fastest growth is e-commerce. So getting customers there seems pretty easy. Entering new markets there seems easier compared to being in the fintech environment. It seems more challenging to expand into new markets, even in Europe, and even if you have a passportable license. So, do you think? Why do you think that is? What is the case? Just the regulation, or is that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it starts about protecting the consumer and the money of the consumer, right? And the economy. Mm-hmm. Look at the financial crisis we had in the past couple of 100 years. It was all about, too many risks in the market, and people suffered from it. So it's worthwhile to protect the consumer and the money of the consumer. So FinLeap is not opposing regulation. What we did in terms of strategic decision is having the most important licenses in our portfolio available. We have a banking license, we have a full insurance license, we have an asset management license. In Germany, which has the stricter rules in terms of regulation, and it's the worst process and the hardest process to receive them, but the beauty is if you have them, then it's easy to passport, because everyone knows that Germany is strictest, so it's just a formality to passport it to other European countries. So that we just did it the whole other way around, right? So we applied for all those licenses with our different ventures, and now our consumer-facing ventures, SMEs-facing ventures, can serve on top of those licenses and go country by country in Europe quite easily and very, very fast. So it's and that's probably the best thing about being a company builder, to serve all those companies with such a full set of licenses, rather to be a single startup having to apply for those licenses in every country. So we serve the whole ecosystem, and not only FinLeap ventures with those licenses, but for example with Solaris Bank, the first technology company in Europe that got a full banking license, has now I think over 50 fintech companies throughout Europe as their partner, as their customer, and serves those fintechs with the license and the product, and helps them to expand in all European countries.
Okay, and growing into those new markets, you say it's now easier because you have that license and you can offer the products, but still an adaptation, at least in terms of language, is of course always necessary, or in most of the cases
that's the easy thing, right?
Which factors do you think are the most relevant when adapting a product to a new market? Is it culture also? Is it language? Is it payment behavior? What do you think is?
I mean, it's very different in every market, right? So as we are quite complex now with our business model, so we have banking, insurance, and asset management players. 2/3 of our portfolio is B2B or B2B2C, and only 1/3 is B2C, which is very different. So when we look at our B2B players, it's all about market potential, the first thing, right? Then we look at how does this market work? So how is competitors? Is the next to regulation, is the technical feasibility there? So PSD2, is this already applied by all those banks, and could you get an easy access to all those interfaces? So these are things we look at. And the foremost important thing for us to expand one of those B2B players to another country is, do we have a good first reference client there? because in B2B is everything about the first client. Right? So this is the way we go. We just opened an office in Milan this year to expand our ventures to Italy. And the first important thing is to find the first couple of banks where we can expand easily and have those ones as our customers. And then the next customer is pretty easy. It's always about the first customer.
Do you think culture is an important aspect when adapting your services, Clément? I always think of you know, in gaming, for example, you know, Europeans have very different thoughts about gaming than, for example, people from Korea who really like this leveling up, where you pretty stupendous activities repeatedly over a long period of time, whereas in Germany and most of Europe, it gets more about character building and having different facets. So in gaming, it's really a cultural aspect of how the people and the customers like their service. Is that a thing that you see in your enterprise customers too?
Definitely. I mean, we see a lot of difference across market, not only language, currency, and so on, but really the behavior of consumer could be different. In Germany, still a lot of people likes to pay by cash, when in the UK you could pay anywhere with NFC now. So as soon as NFC started to launch, we saw immediately that in Poland and the UK, where it was increasing extremely fast. Now it starts to be more visible in countries like France or in Germany, but it's much slower. So openness to change and to new features and to new technology, we could definitely see a big difference across countries. Also in terms of behavior, it's obviously in terms of a touch point with our customer, we see in Italy a lot of people calling us instead of using emails, or in some other country we receive very few touch points per mention. So even the trust factor and the fact that we are basically managing the money from our customer, so there is a trust factor is extremely important, and a lot of sometimes people are calling us just to confirm what we are clearly written on the website, because they just want to talk to someone, and we need to build trust. So it used to be way more difficult in 2012. I think over the years our product became more known and our brand became more known as well, but still it's a very important factor, and we see the difference across countries. Yeah.
Jens, do you see the same trust issues with your customers?
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting because in the end, we're not receiving money, right? We're lending money, but still people obviously wanna ensure that we are a trustful player, that we also exist in the future, that whatever data they provide us with is secure, etc., etc. So, and that takes time. I mean, it takes really a lot of time to build trust, and that's probably the most difficult thing also when scaling to other markets with your own brand, because it's not so much about setting the operations up. Even in our setup, it takes maybe 2 months, but building a proper brand takes years, and the respective distribution network in the countries, origination is still relatively traditional in a way that it goes via intermediaries, via distribution partners to a large extent, which is again different than e-commerce, for instance. And that is just, yeah, you need to invest into the country, and that's why in our scenario it wouldn't make sense basically to go to 4 or 5 countries a year, because in the first instance you basically, yeah, just increase your burn because you need to invest in that setup. And that's something I mean we have done for certain countries. We have also developed our product quite intensively, and now also in light of what you said before, going to new countries actually only makes sense for us, or to a large extent by going there with a larger partner, whether it's kind of because of kind of a referral model or a service model. We're also opening up in terms of value propositions, basically offering also lending as a service, and there obviously there's a lot of interest, but that also is quite beneficial for us to further expand. We're not stopping the expansion, but we might tackle it slightly different, yeah, in the end it's all about trust, and partnering with a larger player who has already built a trusted brand is probably nothing bad.
And trust can be built, of course, but the prerequisite is that you, of course, are allowed to do business in a country via license. So talking about regulation a bit, I don't want to go too deep into this, but of course, different countries have different regulations, sometimes not, sometimes they're harmonized.
Well, yeah. In our case, it's almost like 28 or 7 countries in the European Union and 28 different regulations, even if it just slightly differs. But it would be much easier to have a harmonized one. It doesn't need to be a loose regulation, right? So, for instance, the FCA, to getting the full credit license from the FCA is also not super straightforward in terms of timing, but it's just a very fair process. And having that in, let's say, other jurisdictions would actually make a lot of sense.
Would that be on your wish list too?
Yes, indeed. And I think you just said the magic word harmonization. If I could wish for something, I would wish for standardization. Because indeed, so our first challenge is that licensing across the EU on intermediation is not harmonized at all, which means it's individual by country. But then you have a second aspect, and this is even when it comes to MiFID II, etc. You have harmonized regulation, but consumer protection regulation, which is another very important aspect. And I'm not arguing for a loose set of regulation at all. But the bells and whistles that countries put on their consumer protection are slightly different in every single country. And for us, what's more of a challenge is not really managing a strict set of regulation. That's not as much a problem. We're very happy to do that. But when I need to manage the fact that I have those slight differences, and just on a product information sheet, out of 10 aspects I need on there, 8 are the same, but then there's always 2 that are different. And it's not the same 2 that are different. And that creates a certain amount of complexity that needs to be managed, and that is what actually creates a lot of the cost around regulation. It's not having the product sheet as such that can have 10 or 15 dimensions for all I care.
Do you think that's ever going to change?
Very slowly. So I mean, if you want to take the next point where it really hurts is tax, and that really is a long way out for harmonization. I think there's already a lot being done. So if we look at MiFID II, if we look at a lot of the passportable license, that's already a huge advantage, and it's a reason why someone can launch in, I don't know, then 14 European countries in a year, I think, without harmonization.
16, yeah. 16.
Well, the other 2 were, it was US and Chile.
Okay.
So I think there is a huge advantage that's already been created for the European Union, but if you then compare it sometimes with the US, where it really feels a lot more like a single market with a couple of 100 million people, there's still a lot more complexity to manage within the EU.
Okay, so maybe let's talk about the process of entering a new market in terms of your own company. So of course you have to have a license and you do your research, and maybe there's some opportunistic moves, but you know, still your company has to be ready to enter a new market, and there have to be some certain aspects within the company that this is feasible at all to grow into a new market. What are these aspects for you, for example, Clément?
In our case, I mean, we entered into 10 countries the first year we were live, which was a bit crazy things. But I mean,
10
countries on the first year.
In the first year.
It doesn't mean that we have been successful in all of those 10 countries, to be fair. But it was an extremely good learning. In fact, when I was one of the first employees of SumUp, and we were less than 10 employees, and we had already 4 offices in Europe. And it's the reason why is our business is so complicated that you need to have a lot of different skill sets. And we have hired people where we can hire people, and it was mostly linked to previous experience in other startups. So we had a complex setup from the beginning, but thanks to that, it was much easier to expand into many more countries, because if your native language is English and you have people from all those countries already in your staff, it's then much easier to enter into those countries. You need a small translation, you need a small check, you need to have some reference, some networking and so on. It helps really a lot to have truly international teams to be international. So then the way we entered into those countries, it really depends. We manage most of the operations from Berlin and from Sofia for Europe. But for South America, we have an office in Sao Paulo. For Chile, we have an office in Santiago. In the USA, one office in Boulder. And in Europe, we have additional local offices like in Amsterdam or in Dublin. Or it's for historical reasons, and also because when we merged with P11, one of our competitors last year, we realized that even if the company were structured more or less the same way, and we were more or less the same size, the success in the different countries were really different. So they were successful in countries where we were not successful, and vice versa. And in Netherlands, it was one of the cases where they had a local office, And maybe thanks to that, or maybe thanks to connections, so to partnership or to retail that they have been that they have built locally, they have been really successful. So we kept this local office as well.
So maybe it's also the network that is really important.
Sure.
Not only the team or the expertise, but
it's both. In fact, it's we are present in Berlin definitely because it's a very good place to build a startup in terms of acquiring. It's very international. For example, this year we entered into 16 countries. We need to speak the language of the customer. In reality, it was much easier to hire people speaking Finnish or Estonian than German in Berlin. It's more difficult to hire German-speaking people for support than any other country languages in Berlin. It's very ironic, but it's just a reality. So to build up a company in Berlin, it's definitely very good.
I can hook you up with some German speakers. So you're building fintech companies, and of course those grow into new markets. What do you think? When is the best time to start expanding?
I think we have basically two ways how we expand into new markets. One is we grow with our customer base. So for Solaris Bank, they've been international in a couple of markets in their first month because they had international clients. So they needed to grow with them in those markets. Otherwise, we couldn't have served them. This is one way. And the other way is when we all start the business model we built in Germany because we know that market more or less inside out. The market is big enough, which is always a challenge, right? So when you start in a market that is big enough, you not think that early on about internationalization. What we try to do is get a proof on the business model. We see that we have a great product market fit, and then, not before that, then we just start launching a similar business model and adapt it to markets, depending on market size, depending on do we have a first customer there, if it's B2B, or if it's B2C, how's customer behavior, how is competitive intensity, how much adaptation you would need to do on the technology to launch into that market and go straight in those markets.
Mm-hmm. So when launching into new markets, you know, Berlin and London and many more cities around the world are part of the Start Alliance, which is a startup exchange program that the city of Berlin set up in partnership with London and other cities. They give support, and we do this as Berlin Partner. It's our program. We give access to networks, to mentors. We try to give a kickstart into those new markets. I want to know from you, what is the thing that is the most of help? What is the thing that helps you the most when entering the markets? Is it networks? Is it that you need the best talent in that market? Is it maybe official connections? Or is it just the funding, give us the money and then it's all right? What is the thing that is the most helpful?
Yes, it's like always three things, right? Mm-hmm. So as a consultant, you learn always three things. Understanding the market in depth, so incumbents, competitive intensity, regulation, all around that is really helpful. And there, a network helps, right, to get into that market pretty easy. You need the right talent, ideally someone of that market who is then the local market responsible person, so the country manager, for example. These are more or less the three things that help. And if you have access to those things, it gets a lot easier and a lot faster to move in that market.
Okay, so I have a question for you all, which is a bit of the elephant in the room over the last year. So the Brexit, you know. We as Berliners and we as Germans, we have a whole, I think, different view on this. But how will it influence your business operations? Because it's not only a topic in London and UK in general, but of course for business from Berlin and from Germany too. So what's your take on this? Will it influence operations here, or what do you think will come out of this? Katharina?
Yeah, so I think the answer is we don't know. No one knows. But obviously, so I think to a large extent we're right now a Euro company. So in that sense, that doesn't get affected too much, even in case of a hard Brexit, because it largely happens in continental Europe. It is part of the reason why we felt that an acquisition growth to enter the UK was the right move, because we have a legal entity here, a team here on the ground, which can also, in a scenario of a hard Brexit, exist going forward. But will a hard Brexit happen, or will there be an exit from Brexit? Your guess is as good as mine.
I mean, we have actually entered the UK upon the announcement. I mean, it wasn't then the final or the first time we thought about this, but then the timing was around that. But anyhow, planned, but we executed after internal discussions, and in the end, we still believe in that market as a robust market per se. The fact that we had the FCA license already before helped us obviously to enter the market when we want. Plus, as we don't have any passporting, I mean, not issue, but luxury, so to say, it also doesn't affect our business in case then the UK is not part of the EU anymore, because we can still operate as we do it in Netherlands or other countries. At the same time, we had quite a big jump of UK people applying to Berlin. We do to have the sort of the European, let's call it operation, which includes also client servicing and underwriting in Berlin. And that was actually much easier to find talent than for in Berlin, because people wanted to come there. I mean, Berlin's attractive anyhow, but obviously the uncertainty in the UK hasn't or doesn't create confidence, right? But still, obviously the people are still here. Our team has grown to almost 20 people in the last 12 months in UK. It's our fastest growing country. So overall, for us, still bullish on the UK, and whatever happens with Brexit, assuming the UK obviously survives, everything is good for us as well.
Okay, so basically you two are set in your operations, and you know whatever will come is no problem for you guys. How about you two? Is that?
I mean, it's the same for us. The first aspect was that we profited largely from the Brexit discussions, because a lot of people, especially the Europeans, applied for jobs at FinLeap because they wanted to come back. So this was perfect, because we always, like you said, it's harder to get a German in Berlin than someone from another country. This helped a lot. In terms of internationalization to the UK with our business models, we think that the UK is currently more or less overcrowded with fintech companies. So it's not the first location we'll look at when we try to expand our business. So we're kind of a little bit still hesitant. And we'll wait what will happen really after the Brexit before we decide to go to the UK with one of our businesses.
So that's a direct consequence that you are now hesitant. Okay.
Yeah.
How about you, Clément?
So we want to continue our operations in Europe and in UK. So if Brexit happens, we need 2 licenses. So basically, we have already working in having a second license in Europe, so we could operate in any countries anyhow. So the Brexit might happen or not, it will not change the fact that we will get those 2 licenses. We will continue to have the license in the UK to operate in the UK, and we will have one more to operate in the rest of Europe. So definitely, it's a complication.
It's a complication. It's a hassle.
It's a hassle, but it's I mean, it's a part of the regulatory work that we have to do constantly, anyway. So it's more work. It's mostly a challenge for our compliance team, but for the rest, it's nothing tragic. We also start to see more CVs coming from London, which is not so necessarily bad news, but.
And you guys are all hiring, so anyone, if you need a job?
Yes, we are definitely hiring in many different positions. IT, obviously, development, marketing as well, in operations, support, I mean, anything.
Okay, so I have a couple of minutes for questions. So if there's anyone from the audience who would like to pose a question to the panel, is there anyone? Not at the moment, so I will jump in with my prepared questions for you guys. No problem. So, downstairs it was asked actually, do you have cryptocurrencies? Do you own Bitcoin, or do you not own Bitcoin? And I was really curious, as you're all experts within the industry, what's your take on this? Do you own, or don't you? Yes, no, yes.
So our developers were extremely excited about cryptocurrencies.
Developers.
During an hackathon, they developed a way so we could accept Bitcoins. We launched it live, but we didn't see a lot of tractions, so we didn't focus too much on it for now. But it might come back. But we definitely saw a huge excitement among our developers, not that much in terms of real business behind it.
Okay. No?
Yep.
Two views on that. Privately, I definitely gambled a little bit with it and earned some money, but I would always do it just for gambling reasons, not with a bunch of money. And business-wise, we looked into it and evaluated if you want to build a business in that direction. So a cryptocurrency fund or whatsoever, brokerage. We still haven't decided if we go in that direction, but we're still a little bit hesitant and wanted to see how, especially regulation, will pick up that. I mean, we have a lot of countries worldwide that already restricted that thing. So this might harm the development, the international development of that. So yeah, let's see. But it's definitely an interesting field, and I think we always have to differentiate between Bitcoin and the blockchain as a technology.
Yeah, sure.
Because blockchain is something really interesting, especially in the fintech world, and it will pick up and change a lot of existing business models largely. With that technology, and this is something we're currently looking at very, very in depth.
Okay, and my last question for you. You have a lot of distributed teams, offices in the world, and of course, my job is to work for the city of Berlin, to work with companies there, to work with companies who are not yet there, but who want to come there. So, of course, my interest is in developing big hubs and big cities in the world to become even bigger and more relevant. But being so distributed, do you even think, despite the talent topic, do you even think that location is so important anymore? Or do you think it's not so... What do you think? Is it important if you have 20 people in Berlin and 20 in London, or 40 at one point? Or do you think it's distributed teams is just as fine? Or
I mean, we see it already in Berlin. We saw a huge difference between when our ventures moved out, because the office was so small, and they just moved a couple of streets away from us. It was totally different in working together to the current situation where all the ventures move back into one building. So it's even in one city harder to work together. So for us as an ecosystem, fintech ecosystem, it's even better to have them in one house rather than just in one city.
Okay. Anyone else?
So yeah, I'm afraid we're also a bit on the centered side, so it would be interesting to hear from you too, because for us it's also a lot of the talking with each other, talking to each other, talking between departments is so much easier, and we had the same sort of, we're currently sitting all in one room. We had a point in time where IT sat in a separate room, and you immediately notice it's just, so even nowadays with Slack and video chat and whatever, physical proximity helps. On the other hand, physical proximity in a market also helps, so it's always a trade-off that you need to manage to a certain extent.
Yeah, I agree. In the end, I mean, Berlin for us, that's the headquarter, and obviously R&D and central functions. But in the end, localization is key. And if you look also at other banks, right, they have their headquarter, but yeah, they are present in the markets where they operate. But Berlin, as I think the fintechs, SIEM, etc., has actually gained some traction in the past. I think the administration still needs to do a bit more to further, to basically support here. But I think the Berlin as a fintech hub, it's not there yet, but it's on its right path.
Okay, Jens, Katharina, Clément, and Carolin, thank you very much for your interesting insight. That was our panel. Give a big round of applause, please, for our panelists. If you have any questions, we are here for a bit. Thank you, and see you soon.
Thanks to you.